in a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit.
The world is not in your books and maps. It's out there.
What? No.
Have you done much fighting? Thought as much.
The Hobbit, an unexpected journey. This film is not yet ready.
Hello, and welcome to episode 53 of We'll Review It Ourselves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks, we'll take a randomly selected movie from our collection, and we'll review it ourselves. I'm Brian Morgan, and this is...
This is always Daniel Bergman.
Yay!
Yay. Pardon the draggy sound of my voice, as we discussed earlier. I'm not a morning person, and we're doing this in the morning for some strange reason.
Hey, you're the one that said we could do it in the morning, so I'm just taking advantage of the time.
Yeah, I was a different person then.
Well, you know, that whole East Coast, West Coast thing kind of does add a modicum of difference to what your morning is and what my morning is, so...
Truth.
But we are discussing The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey today. And before we get into the usual question about how this got on our shelves, we will go through some listener feedback because, as was mentioned earlier, and you'll probably notice that in the other episodes as they're released, because we're recording this before episode 51 and 52 are released, so we haven't gotten any feedback on those because obviously you haven't heard them yet, but we discussed our brief hiatus. Again, not going to go into details, life got in the way, but we're back and we are releasing, so please, again, let's we always enjoy your feedback, and in fact we did get some concern about us being gone. Rob Neese on our Facebook page had posted me waiting for the next episode and kind of keep us honest about coming back and that sort of thing, and we certainly do appreciate that. And speaking of listener Rob, who is our Canadian listener, he also left us a voicemail on episode 50. It's rather longish, so I'm not going to read it. Except to say that there are some interesting textual changes on the transcription service from Google Play, or Google Voice rather. So it is amusing to read through this and then listen to the audio. He did specifically give us permission to use his voice on the podcast, so other listeners who have not heard Rob Neese on our podcast will be able to hear him on that. He enjoyed our John Wick episode, and he discusses his history, so we'll just give that a listen right now.
Well, hey there, Dan and Brian. Rob Neese calling from Canada here. I guess, you can use my voice this time around. Try to keep my thoughts semi-organized. So I just wanted to say, John Wick episode, long anticipated, lived up to the hype. As a matter of fact, your digression to discussing, the meticulous habits of hitmen inspired me to do a little bit of cleaning up around the house, which is long overdue, so thanks for that. So far as my own history of John Wick, I can say I took my father to see it when it came out. We didn't really have high expectations, and we both wound up liking it rather a lot, which is uncommon because I don't think we've really been seeing eye to eye on movies very much since the early to mid 90s. I think the last one that we were equally fans of might have been a Seagal movie, so that kind of dates that. Insofar as your criticism of the film, I think you're pretty much spot on. I myself was getting increasingly irritated watching it as to how oblivious dopey Theon Greyjoy was, being seemingly the only person on the planet Earth who hadn't heard of John Wick. As the plot developed, but of course, the payoff in the end was worth it. I haven't listened to the entirety of your discussion of collections yet, but I guess the thing I wanted to say about it is my experience of collecting things is, for me anyway, just how weirdly specific it can be. You know, it's not like you're a Superman fan and you're necessarily going to buy absolutely every piece of merchandise, you know, under the sun that has the Superman logo on it. Like in my case, I just kind of get into one sub niche of merchandising or series, and that's what I've got to get my grubby claws on. You know, quick example, if I'm going to buy Star Wars stuff, I like the 3 3/4 inch figurines, I guess because they remind me of when I was growing up as a kid. You know, the idea of owning a 6-inch figurine or anything of that nature is anathema to me. I couldn't contemplate it. Even more so, I have kind of my own special rule, which is I won't buy any merchandise like that unless it's on sale. And I guess that's my one way of rationalizing it to myself. So if it's in a clearance bin or if I see that it's reduced for quick sale, whatever the case may be, I'm like, okay, all right, I'll take that off your hands. But full retail, no thanks. Or maybe just call that my frugal Canadian nature. Oh yeah, one last thing about collections there, bud. You noted that it appeared that some of my films were in French. You know, I wish I were bilingual, but the law of the land here in Canada is all the DVD packaging is bilingual, right? So it can be sold in English Canada as well as Quebec and
Yeah, I think I said something about this, but yeah, we found out that there's a time limit on the length of the voicemails. So part 2 of Rob's voicemail is coming right up.
Guess there's a time limit on these. Sorry for my rambling. I was just going to say that all the DVDs here come in both languages. And I actually can remember, coming back to my point about specificity, I worked with a guy many years ago. I didn't really think much of him, but one thing that he was very passionate about was driving down to Buffalo, New York to buy DVDs because he didn't like French being on the cover. So that was kind of his scene as well. He would make regular trips south of the border specifically for that. These are obviously in the pre-Amazon times. Oh yeah, and you missed the jewel in the crown, guys, which is my copy of the 1980s Japanimation classic Ninja Scroll. Highly recommended. Whether you're a fan of manga or not, I personally am not. I'm not really into that subculture, that genre, but it is a masterpiece. And as a matter of fact, I remember going to, some friend's house. She knows my wife, so I got to meet the husband, as one does. And the moment I saw he had Ninja Scroll on his shelf as well was the moment I knew, okay, this is a safe space. I'm going to get along with this guy just fine. And we continue to be friends to this day. So that's about all I had to say, guys. Hope you enjoy my magnificent upper Canadian accent, eh? And I'll be looking forward to hearing show number 51.
Well, now that we've had a chance to listen to that, Rob Neese, I just want to thank you for your kind words. And again, being patient as we, went on our little hiatus.
Yeah, I say thank you as well. To have feedback and that, people all the way from a whole other country are listening to us. I mean, that's kind of a weird thing that I'm still trying to wrap my head around, that we're world known.
Yeah, it's funny. I look on our dashboard on our hosting service, and we have been listened to in multiple countries on every continent on the planet, except for Australia. We've only been listened to in one country, in Australia, because it's a continent country, so we'll leave that alone.
I was going to say.
But yeah, it's crazy. And we certainly appreciate it. I did get a call from listener Jeff, who, again, I know personally, and he was not as excited about the John Wick portion of episode 50. I mean, he enjoyed it, but he really found our conversation about collections and the psychology of why we collect things and how we collect things and that sort of thing particularly fascinating. So, Dan, I know I didn't speak to you about that specifically, but yeah, I got some vocal feedback from a friend. So that's kind of cool.
All right. Very good.
And last, certainly not least, we received just positive feedback in general about the podcast, and it was from a listener, Tommy Cunningham, who again I also know personally, but he downloaded a bunch of episodes and listened to them while he was driving down the road, and said, "We saved his life. Saved my life." He said, "Gents, you saved me again on another long drive to Florida, but now I have to rewatch Conan, Hitchhiker's Guide, Howard the Duck, Ghostbusters, and, yes, make fun of me if you will, finally watch The Princess Bride. Yeah, I know, that will..." Yeah, I know, thanks. You all really make that long drive so much better. I do without a doubt appreciate the nerdiness that is this podcast. On a side note, Brian, to my disappointment, I would not be cool enough to be in your nerd circle. Thanks, guys. And I responded. I mean, you can go look on the Facebook page, and I think you responded as well. Tommy is definitely cool enough to be in our nerd circle. Dan, you're going to have to take my word on that.
Okay.
Tommy was the one that gave me one of his spare lightsabers when I retired from the Navy. And if one has a spare lightsaber that one gives to another human, and it's not just a, like $10 Toys R Us when it existed special, but an actual replica collector's edition sort of thing, then you are definitely nerdy enough to be in our circle.
Yeah. The funny thing is that, I've been an EMT paramedic for 18 plus years, and I don't think I've ever had anybody specifically say, "You saved my life." I think that's the first time anybody's ever said that to me. Or towards me.
It's not your life-saving techniques that save a life. It's a podcast.
It was my podcast.
Nice. But to all of our listeners, thank you again for the feedback. We really do appreciate it, and your patience for, again, dealing with that little bit longer than it meant to be hiatus. With that, let us move on to how this got on our shelves. Dan, how did this movie get on your shelf?
Oh, it's like every time I keep thinking to myself, it's like I could just joke about it, say I went to Best Buy and I bought it, or I ordered it on Amazon, but nah, never gonna do that. I don't think that's. I basically, I've said it before, I'm a completionist, and this is very much a part of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and even more so because it's the same producers, same director, same actors. It's just another volume of that collection, and I could not have it, so to say. It had to be there.
Okay. I'm kind of in the same thought process arena. I enjoyed the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I know this was made by the same people, and even brought back Martin Freeman as Bilbo Baggins. So I went to see this in the theater and bought it when it came out because it goes with the theme that I generally tend to have in my movie collection, sci-fi, fantasy, that sort of thing. But I'll be honest, and I know we're not talking about other movies. I don't own the other two movies in this trilogy. I just own this one. I just haven't gotten around to going out and picking those up yet. In fact, I don't even think I've seen all of the movies like in order, and it's on my list of things to do is to sit down and watch this one, The Desolation of Smaug, or Smaug, I suppose is the way it's pronounced in the movie, and then the Battle of the Five Armies. So this is here because it followed the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I will say when we did our books episode, I believe that was episode 13, all that time ago, I discussed the fact that I had never actually read the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I have actually read The Hobbit, so I have a little bit more connection, I guess, with The Hobbit. So,
yeah, I remember in our books episode. Yeah, it's like I state that I tend to enjoy movies more if I see the movie first, and then read the book later. And it doesn't diminish how much I enjoy the book by doing so, but it does affect the movie. So I tend to do it that order. So yeah, I'm with you. I never actually read The Lord of the Rings until I watched the movie, and I've never actually read The Hobbit yet.
Hmm.
And I know a lot of my friends in nerd circles, even my own family who are huge Tolkien fans, would be like, "What?" It's like, um, they were like that when Lord of the Rings came out in the theaters, and they said, "Oh, don't you remember this? Well, they left out this scene or something like that." And I was just like, "I don't know. I've never read the book." And they're like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, I never read the book. Sorry."
Yeah, I'll be honest. I read the book when I was 14 or 15. I mean, I was, young-ish. It was a while ago. So I did not remember the details. I couldn't tell you what they put in, what they pulled out.
Mhm.
It was kind of like watching it anew, if you will, because I couldn't remember certain things. Although I will say, and for all intents and purposes, we're already talking about how this got on our shelves. We own it because we enjoyed the Lord of the Rings. It seems like we're pretty much the same. So we'll consider this the transition to talking about the movie. But yeah, the one of the scenes that I saw in the movie that I remember from the book specifically, and it's really kind of odd. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with the story arc in general, but the scene with the trolls where the horses were stolen and Bilbo has to burgle the horses back. I remember that from the book, and I don't remember the specifics to, again, know what they changed. But I do remember that happening because the version of the book that I had little line-drawn images at the beginning of each chapter, and the beginning of this chapter had 3 trolls sitting around a campfire. So yeah, that's the reason why I remember that part of the book specifically. I just remember the Hobbit finding the ring and doing all the things that happen in the movie. And really, I remember the dragon being a big thing. Smaug. Which I've always pronounced smog, so, I mean, I guess it is what it is.
No, no, but it's funny that you were saying that you only own this particular movie and not the trilogy. I specifically bought the trilogy in a box set, which is the same as what I did with Lord of the Rings. Because when you got a movie series like this, they tend to come in really nice box sets, and Lord of the Rings really did come in a beautiful box set. Had a and excuse me, it was a beautiful box. Packaging is big, and for me at least, when I collect DVDs, and a box set such as that. Really disappointed that I waited and I bought this box set, the extended editions and everything, and it's kind of in a little flimsy little cardboard thing, kind of lackluster. I
Yeah,
was a little disappointed on that,
that's sad.
but it's got all 3. The Blu-ray transfer is beautiful. I have to say, if you have the ability to watch it in ultra high def, I really recommend it.
Well, is that ultra high def or is that just high def? Because the 4K UHD televisions are ultra high def by technical or at least sales description nowadays.
Well, I'll say it this way. I might very well be misusing the description, but I mean these are standard Blu-rays. They're not the 4K, but the TV is a 4K.
Oh, okay. Does it upscale?
So
Do you upconvert? Does it upconvert?
I don't know.
Hmm.
I haven't had the TV long enough to really fully explore all its capabilities.
Okay.
Which um,
On the list.
on the list of things to do.
Yeah.
It's just because I get so caught up and it's like, oh, okay, well, this looks really cool. Oh, what is this? And then, it's just, I totally forget what I was doing.
Well, I know this is a weird segue, but because you're talking about technology and ironically, we're talking about Tolkien and Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. And I mean, specifically, yes, we're talking about The Hobbit, but this pertains to the first Lord of the Rings movie. I was at a store, at a department store, whatever, and they were displaying, or I was in the television section and they were talking about the DVD players, and this is well before Blu-ray and everything, but they were talking about the differences between regular scan and progressive scan, and they used the Fellowship of the Ring as an example. And there's the scene where Frodo is walking down the path and Gandalf comes up. He's still in his wagon and all that kind of stuff. And he switches back and forth, so it wasn't a side-by-side comparison between Gandalf on the wagon, between Gandalf on the wagon and looking at the brim of his hat. And in one mode, it looked like a soft sort of felt kind of thing. It was just smooth and like, yep, that's a hat thing, whatever. But when he flipped the switch, you could see the textures in the hat. And I can only imagine that your Blu-ray to your ultra high definition television does a similar thing and really brings out a lot of the small, minute details.
It does. You do definitely see a lot of textures, and sometimes I joke around where it's where the technology brings something to a certain level, and you're like, well, I don't know. It's like past a certain temperature, hot is hot. You don't care if it's 98 or 101. It's hot. Loud, loud is loud. After a certain volume, it doesn't matter if it goes to 10 or 11. It's loud. But when it comes to this high def thing, it definitely adds a nuance because, like you said, looking at the comparisons of how you perceive Gandalf's clothing. I think it's like, okay, in one way you're looking at it and it's just like, okay, it's a gray hat. But when you have that texture and everything, it kind of adds, again, at least for me, maybe for you, the way you were describing it, that if he's wearing something that, you can look at the texture and it's like, oh, it looks comfortable, or it might look scratchy. It might, it kind of gives you a little bit of that additional nuance to the character. It's like, this is what the person's wearing. Is he comfortable with that? Is he not? I wouldn't be comfortable because if it looks like burlap, it's like, well, if that's
That's itchy.
It's itchy, but then if he never shows anything about, oh, he's a rough, gruff person who doesn't really succumb to such annoyances, or maybe that is comfortable to him, which again, it adds a nuance to the character,
Yeah, absolutely. I think it makes the movie and the world richer, and I think going to Tolkien and his fascination, his obsession, I guess, with world building, it's just another detail that would be described in the book, and when you see that level of detail, again, to use the word over, in the movie, and see it that precisely and that clearly, it does make it truer to the book, or at least gives you the immersive feeling of being in this world. So I think Tolkien would be happy with the ultra high definition stuff, unless he wanted people to imagine it, in which case my imagination is high def as well.
Yeah, well, even if he just wanted to, I still imagine. I mean, like again, it's like I look at that and I think about how people feel in their clothes. I mean, let me give another example. I mean, the scene when they first start their journey and it's raining, and Bilbo does not have rain gear per se, whatever it is hobbits wear in the rain, but he's just in his regular clothes, so you can tell he's soaking wet
and miserable.
And I'm miserable with him because I look at that and I see, and in beautiful high def, I see his jacket, which normally looks relatively comfortable, but now it's soaking wet, and I feel his misery. I am there with him. I think that that some people say the technology gives us too much, and I think no. I think in this case specifically, it gave me just the right amount to where I was living that scene with him.
I agree. I also agree with the assessment that sometimes technology gives us too much, because there are certain things that when you do a special effect that used to work in a standard definition movie, in the 80s, let's say, when you convert that to digital and you upscale it to high definition and you look at the special effect and go, oh no, I'd rather watch that in original definition. But there are some things that, I don't know if it's forced special effects makers to improve their thought processes, and I'm sure they have. Obviously, they improve things all the time. But because of the clarity of the image, if they have had to upscale some of the gunk that they use for snot, like we'll go back to the troll scene when the troll sneezes and there's Bilbo, that snot looked like just some random goo, not necessarily what I would think troll snot might look like. I mean, maybe I'm just, being picky, but there were a few things in this movie that kind of struck me as like, oh yeah, that's definitely, something that would have looked fine in a lower definition, but kind of looks too clear.
Or even as a practical effect,
Mm-hmm.
it would have been better. Which that is one of the shortcomings of this film, is that its use of CGI didn't always hit the mark. I
was just about to say something to that effect. I agree. Do you have some particular instances in mind of CGI that didn't quite hit the mark?
The use of CGI for the wargs, the big baddie wolfy-like creatures.
Mm-hmm.
I just recently watched a special feature. What was it for? Because this is not something I jotted on notes, so I wasn't expected to talk about this. So bear with me. But basically the gist of it is that, oh, that's right. It was they were talking about Jurassic Park, and they're switching between animatronics, practical effects, and CGI. And they said one of the things they had the most difficult time was making the dinosaurs look like actual animals when it came to the CGI. And it's like paleontologists would come and it's like, that doesn't look like an animal. It looks like a dinosaur, but it's not moving like an animal. And that's what they were. They were animals.
Yeah.
And, with that little mini documentary fresh in my head, it made me think of all, the different movies that used CGI versus practical effects. And the movie that came to mind in that thought process was the original Alien, 1979, Ridley Scott. The alien was somebody in a suit.
Yep.
Not a complete suit, because they never showed the complete alien until the very end. But it moved like it was alive, and that's what made it incredibly scary. You compare that with a later Alien movie like Alien Resurrection, where the aliens were CGI'd, not as scary.
Yeah, they just don't look real.
They don't look like they're in the world with them and everything. And I think I've said it before in other podcasts where it's like, it doesn't matter if you say that will look like good CGI. If you're saying anything that it was CGI, it was bad CGI. I mean, that's my opinion. Because like an agent said to Harrison Ford, it's like, I look at him and I see actor, and Harrison Ford responded, it's like, well, if you see actor and not a carpenter, then he's not a good actor, something like that.
Yeah.
And that, the same goes for CGI. If you're recognizing it as CGI, not that great. And I found myself looking at the wargs in this case and like going, it's like, yeah, they're CGI'd, they're not that great.
Yeah. I will say the scene with the giant birds at the end, the feathers were incredibly well done. And just to counter your opinion a little bit, I both admired it as CGI and was immersed in it. So I recognized that it was CGI and it was really good CGI.
Well, as a secondary thought, because when you come to it, But if your initial thought, so I should qualify that statement, but yeah, as a secondary thought, because I mean, another good example was Davy Jones and the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. Initially, I was like, wow, that's incredible. I mean, how do they do that? It was CGI. Okay, that makes sense. It's like that to me is an example there because I did not think CGI at first.
And yeah, and I'm glad you made that qualifier because that is an important distinction. If the first thing you think of is, that's good CGI, then maybe it's not as good as you think. But if it's a like an appreciation for the CGI, like wow, I couldn't even tell until I either found out or just realized like, oh, that must be CGI. Because one of the things that I don't like about this movie is that it relies so heavily on CGI. The entire Goblin King, under the mountain scenes, all of the goblins were CGI. And especially the Goblin King, and don't get me wrong, I'm okay with CGI. I don't have a problem with it. But when the whole scene is relying on it as heavily as it did, it does kind of distract from the story you're trying to tell me in the movie itself. And I know I hate making this comparison because it does talk about another movie, but in The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, again, when they're under the mountain and they're running through the room with all of the pillars.
Moria.
Yes. When you look down on that, you're like, oh, that's all CGI, and you can tell because the characters don't move naturally, like you were saying about Jurassic Park. Well, yeah, they look like dinosaurs, but they're not moving like animals. It's like, yeah, these guys look like people, but they're not moving like people. So it really does take you out of the story for a minute, which I think is a negative. I mean, it bothers me.
Yeah. It's funny you talk about that, people. If you ever really want to see a great side-by-side comparison without having to set up, oh, this one, that one, or whatever, it's just one movie scene where you just hit play and watch it. Terminator 2.
Okay.
In the scene, the after the chase in the LA wash, when the truck blows up and they look back and it's like, okay, we're good, and they are Schwarzenegger and the kid right off, and then the T-1000 emerges from the flames. He's in his liquid metal state, and you watch him walk and he doesn't look natural, but then when they transition and he fills out and he becomes the cop,
yeah,
you see that all of a sudden it's like, oh, now he's walking naturally because now it's the actor. You can see that transition. So if listeners, if you ever want to see exactly what we're talking about, whether something doesn't look natural to where it does look natural, watch that 5 seconds of scene right there where he changes from his liquid state into his human disguise, and you can see that, what we're talking about.
Yeah, and that is a perfect example. And one of the things that I think that's also a perfect example of is understanding the limitations of what it is you have, because that actually works well with the story. He's damaged, he's coming out of the fire, he's in his liquid metal, we'll call it more vulnerable form. And as he repairs himself and morphs back to, the human form that he had chosen, then he's, kind of fully repaired from the damage he just took. It actually works well with the story, where in this movie, the wargs, as you discussed, when you see them bounding across the land, they don't look like they're obeying the laws of physics, and they should. It's kind of goes to the reliance on the CGI, and I get it, they're fantasy characters, fantasy creations, but they're still creatures and still have to obey the laws of physics, unless you say they don't.
Yeah, true. I just wonder, how different or even how good it would look, if they went the Jim Henson route. And I bring this up too because, pretty soon Netflix will be coming out with a new Dark Crystal.
Mm-hmm.
And they're using animatronics, and they're using, puppets, Muppets, whatever, and I look at the original Dark Crystal and I look at Labyrinth, and it works. I mean, those were made just on the threshold when movies started really relying so heavily on CGI. Those were kind of among the last of the puppet movies, and it works.
But does it work in ultra high definition? And that's the question that, in some cases it does.
I will have to say that it can, and I think it'll work better because, again, we talked about textures, and again, if you look at a creature that is CGI that isn't, again, the wargs, I mean, they look like, textural wise, they look like kitty cats. It's like, oh, if he wasn't so sharpy and bitey, it's like he'd actually be fun to play with. No, it's like they're supposed to be, again, it's like they're not kitties, they're burlap. They're walking burlap. So
yes.
If you had a practical effect, a Muppet type thing that moved like a real animal, then yeah, it would bring you into that world. It's like, okay, this is not something I want to pet. I'm not going to play with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I will say that I think the use of CGI for Gollum in this movie, and obviously The Lord of the Rings, is kind of appropriate. I don't know that it would be as simple a thing to special effect a human being into that character, because the way he's presented, the way he's described in the book, is, nearly not human. I mean, he's so mutated that I think you might be able to do it with a practical effect. It would be a challenge to make it functional. Sort of like the Iron Man suit in the Iron Man movies and, the Avengers movies. Most of that's just CGI'd on, and when it is a practical effect, it's because he can stand still and not move. So, there are points where this has opened up a lot of new doors, and I think, again, the use of CGI as Gollum is good. Andy Serkis came back for the motion capture, which, again, he already understood the
nuances of the character.
Yeah, and the motion that he wanted for Gollum when he was moving through the cave and trying to find Bilbo. It was just, he already understood the character, yeah.
Well, this is 2 points. One is kind of to add what you just said. One is like a good sort of segue. So, first thing, and it's like Gollum as a CGI character. Yeah, I agree. Fantastic. I mean, you could say that this is where a majority of the budget went into, was to bring him alive. But it's good that you mentioned Andy Serkis, because this is a case where it's not 100% CGI, because this is motion capture, which I guess you can say is a good hybrid between real life and CGI. So it's just the CGI. It's just the suit. It's still Andy Serkis under there.
Yeah, he's the one doing the motion and making the facial expressions. Yeah,
he's breathing life into that character. Now, if they had very well trained dogs to do motion capture for the wargs, hey, maybe, I mean, I don't know if anybody's ever done motion capture with animals yet.
I don't know.
That might have worked.
That's a good question. Listeners, if you know if motion capture has been used with creatures, let us know.
Yeah, let us know. I'd like to know, because I just said that just now, popped into my head, and I'm just like, huh. Anywho.
Yeah, because I know they've probably used CGI with like forms, kind of. I don't want to say like Dark Crystal puppets, because obviously why would you build something to that scale and then not use it? But I'm sure they've done motion capture with points on a creature in that respect, but it's still a special effect.
Well, yeah, if you ever watch in the making of Jurassic Park, I mean, they kind of did that. They built models and they did motion capture of the puppets.
Mm-hmm.
And again, they still had a problem making their movements look natural. It's an incredibly difficult thing, and so that's why I'm like wondering if they had motion captured an ostrich, that they would have had an easier time with the Galmamima scene, because they said that was one of the things that they had to do, because again the paleontologists saw their original work for those particular dinosaurs and they said, yeah, it looks too mechanical, and they had to really pay attention to how ostriches run.
Mm-hmm.
And they tried to mimic that, but I'm just kind of wondering if they had just motion captured a particularly well trained ostrich, if that might have been a little easier for them. So again, I don't know if they've ever motion captured an animal. That'd be interesting to find out.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I agree.
but the other segue is, like, you brought up a really good point when they said they brought back Andy Serkis, and I wanted to say this earlier, but good time as any. The thing I love so much, the really high point for this movie and for this trilogy is that, yeah, they brought back a lot of all of them. I think all the same actors.
Yeah, if you played a character in The Lord of the Rings, you played the same character in this movie.
Yes, I mean Gandalf, Elrond, Saruman, Galadriel, all those characters, and
Bilbo.
for the subsequent movies, you have Orlando Bloom, and I mean, you don't see that often, I guess. I mean, yeah, you had that kind of continuity with Star Trek. You had the original cast in their movies from the TV show into film.
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars. Mark Hamill has always been Luke. Carrie Fisher has always been Princess Leia. Harrison Ford has always been Han Solo. Peter Mayhew has always been Chewbacca.
Yeah, rest his soul.
Rest his soul. Carrie Fisher's too. Sorry.
Yep.
I missed. And to a large extent, I was going to mention the MCU, but I totally forgot. Rhodey's not the same Rhodey. Bruce Banner's not the same Bruce Banner.
We're on our third now.
A third Bruce Banner?
Well, not technically in the MCU, because the first Ang Lee Hulk was not set in the MCU. It was just a thing that a movie that existed. But we are on our third Bruce Banner, same as we're on our third Peter Parker.
Yeah, but in the MCU, in the 20 plus films that follow the Infinity Saga and now coming into Phase 4, they've generally been the same actors.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I love that kind of continuity. I love that longevity, because I don't know that if somebody, and excuse me, spoiler alerts, I don't think I would have felt the same way at the end of Endgame if it was an entirely different Tony Stark.
Sure.
If they had some other actor saying, "Okay, I know I'm not Robert Downey Jr., but I'm Tony Stark. Really, I am." And at the end, when whatever happens to, I'm trying to minimize the spoiler here, but whatever it is that happened. I don't know if I would have felt the exact same way as I did, because I ugly cried at the end of Endgame. I mean, I was a terrible mess at the end.
I'm not laughing at you ugly crying. I'm just understanding and laughing with you.
No problem. Like I said, I just wanted to mention that love because of bringing back the actors.
Oh, no, I totally agree. And that's one of the things that I also care for about this trilogy, and this movie in particular, obviously, is that, yeah, Gandalf is Gandalf. It's Sir Ian McKellen. And you're like, oh, hey, he's either a wizard or Magneto. Take your pick. And I know he's done other things, but in the cultural zeitgeist, it's like, oh, Gandalf's here. Okay, got it. Like, yeah, he has a name. He's done other things. Let's move past that. Actually, a weird segue. One of my favorite movies with Sir Ian McKellen is a movie called Apt Pupil, if you're familiar with it.
Yes, I have it.
I love that movie. It's just so dark and character driven, and I like it a lot. So anyway.
It's a good one. We should review it sometime.
Back to the Hobbit. It's on the list. Back to the Hobbit.
I gotta say that to kind of balance this out, to show that I'm not just kissing this movie's butt. When it comes to continuity, there was one little problem, one little detail, and the devil's in the details for me, where it was a little inconsistent. In the beginning of the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Rings, in the this is what happened before part of the thing, and they show it's like the ring was found by the most unlikely of creatures, Hobbit, and they show Bilbo like in a prone position, like laying on the ground, kind of digging the ring out of the dirt, and it's like, oh, what is this? It's a ring.
Yeah.
That's not how he came to the ring in this movie.
True.
He kind of just like was walking by and he picked it up like he picked up like, ooh, a quarter, It's like,
Yeah, because you see it fall out of Gollum's pockets, and yeah, then he's just like, yeah, okay, cool. What is this?
hey, look at this,
Yeah.
and and it's like, oh, it's just like that was literally the first time I saw this movie and I saw that was my reaction. I was like, oh,
Well,
it's like,
I gotta say, and don't get me wrong, when I pick up a ring off the ground, the first thing I think of is to put it in my pocket. The thing that vexed me in this movie, and the only way you can talk about this is by comparing it to the Fellowship of the Ring, is in both cases the use of the ring, because I don't know that Frodo actually knew what the ring did. He just knew it was a powerful relic. In both cases, they figured out that it turned them invisible because it went up into the air and then landed on their finger. Never mind the physics; it's a magic ring. I expect that it perhaps
was the will of the ring
on a finger. Exactly. I'll buy that. But comparing some of the key parts of this movie and the resolutions, or what happened, there were a lot of parallels between this and the Fellowship of the Ring. And for me, that kind of took away from this movie because, again, the ring flying down and falling on the finger happened really probably about the similar point in the movie as it did in the Fellowship of the Ring. I was reading online, there was some discussion about the pacing of this movie. When in The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf goes and speaks to Saruman, and he's placed at the top of the tower. He speaks to an insect, the insect flies away, and a giant thing comes back and rescues him. In this movie, they're trapped in the tree, he speaks to an insect, and a giant thing comes back and rescues them. I mean, whether it happened in the book that way or not, whether it happened in either book, in both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, is not so important. The idea is that you just basically did the same thing in movies set in the same universe with, in one case, the same character, just a mildly different situation, and in the other case, you may as well have done it with the same character because it's functionally the same thing. That part kind of bothered me, and maybe it's just seeing it on the screen as opposed to visualizing it in your head when you read the book. And again, having never read The Lord of the Rings, I don't know if that's really what happened in the book, so it could be that. But there were some things that seemed like they were lifted straight from The Lord of the Rings and pushed into this movie that I kind of wanted to see a different story in the same universe, and that made it feel like it was functionally the same thing.
I can see the problem you have, the repetition. It's like, okay, we've seen it done before, show us something new.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
But to play, and I don't like using this term, but I can't think of a better one because it's still early in the morning for me, to play devil's advocate, in its defense, it's just like, you're in this world and, they don't want to bring too much new stuff. And it's like, I already believe that the Eagles, the big things that you're talking about, are a bit of a deus ex machina.
Yeah.
They're just kind of like, okay, we don't know how to solve this, so send in the Eagles. But I will give it, in its defense, I will give it like, okay, they did it in Lord of the Rings, so it's established that they are a thing. They were used twice in the Lord of the Rings trilogy because it's like they're there. They're it's something that was established is a go-to for Gandalf, and him using it again, it's like, okay, yeah, it's more of the same, but at the same time, it is a tool that he has in his belt, and if he's going to use a hammer more than once, at least it's a hammer and not like, oh no, all of a sudden I've got this mighty jackhammer. Well, where the hell did that come from?
Yeah, okay, fair enough. I mean, I will accept that as a softening of the impact.
Yeah, but just on a little side note though, the eagles in this particular one, uh, yeah, it's like when I saw the moth, I'm like, oh, okay, the eagles are coming to the rescue, and I didn't think, Deus Ex Machina at first, but it wasn't until like I watched it a couple of times and said, yeah, they seem to be the ones that just show up and it's like, oh, they saved the day and everything. But after they dropped them off on that rock and they said, oh, we're safe and everything, Bilbo, thank you for being here. I was so wrong about you. Oh, look, there's the mountain. And it's like, yeah, there is the mountain. Eagles couldn't fly you just a little bit closer to it.
I
Yeah,
was trying to avoid saying that. Like, no,
I mean,
it's
I'm
about the
just saying.
journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, 3-minute flight for you. It's about a 3-week walk for us. It's like, yeah, thanks, guys. And you couldn't put us like on any flat part of the ground. You put us on this thing that we got to climb down now.
I'm not gonna lie. I feel bad because I was kind of like making a little bit of fun of this movie while it was on, and Christy was sitting on the couch on the other end, and when the Eagles dropped them off, and I looked at it, I was like, "Oh my god, what are they gonna walk up there and lift Simba up?" And I started singing, "The Circle of Life," and then when they look out and they see the Lonely Mountain, and everything is beautiful and green, and then the Lonely Mountain is dark, and I said, "Simba, you must never go there." So I felt a little bad, but it did look nice.
You wanna know something funny though? My Lion King moment in this movie wasn't that. If you look at the Goblin City, the little spire of rock that he's sitting on, kind of looks like the spire of Pride Rock.
Oh, I thought it was more the Scar rock that he was sitting on when the hyenas were, in line and marching. A shining
His
arrow is tiptoeing.
His was more vertical. The Goblins was a more at an angle. So I looked at it and I thought that I'm not saying everybody else will see it, but maybe they will. I don't know.
Well, not for nothing. I always turn the first word of Circle of Life to Das Vidanya. I don't know why. Das Vidanya Tovarish.
That's the Russian knockoff of the
yes.
Lion King. It's the Lion Tsar.
Goodbye, comrade. Goodbye. I will see you later. It's funny because I actually had a note in my notes about what you just talked about the Eagles not taking them the rest of the way from Pride Rock to the Elephant Graveyard. And now I can't stop doing it. Nice. And my response to that was, well, it's about the journey. It's about the discovery along the way. It's about life not being easy and, surviving the experiences along the way so that you learn and grow. It's also, and this is a wonderful segue, it's about family. This movie is infused with being a part of something, being a part of a family. Obviously, Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thrawn, son of Thrin, son of Throne, son of Thrune. Pick a different variation. Anyway, it's about family. It's about honoring your ancestors. It's also about being a part of something bigger than just yourself. Because one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about is what's the fundamental message of this story? At least this movie. What is Peter Jackson trying to tell us? Because
get off your ass and go live your life. That's
yeah, exactly. Stay safe and quiet and lead a nondescript little life, or come out of your hole and take a chance. Live life. But the other piece is family, and the sometimes obsession that we have with family honor and how it can be a source of pride and damaging at the same time, because you see Thorin, just to the point where he is willing to, not willing to, he makes mistakes in his quest to defend his family honor, and defend his, grandfather and father, and Bilbo kind of educates him about that. It's one of the, I know we're getting to the end of the story, or when I say the end of the story, I mean like the end of the trilogy. So that didn't happen in this movie. I'm sorry, spoilers. Kind of talks to him about that. But one of the things that Gandalf uses against Bilbo to get him inspired to be intrigued about this adventure is talking about Bilbo's uncle. And yes, he exaggerates and he even tells him, but it still goes to family. And what does being a part of a family and something bigger mean to you? And how can you use that to motivate yourself? I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know, I was waiting to see if there was a question in there.
Well, that was the question. It was kind of a, like, do you agree and do you see something different?
I did see that in there. I mean, it didn't stand out for me. I mean, I guess I was watching it with different eyes and had a different focus, everything. But yeah, I mean, with the way, just listening to the way you describe it and everything, my response to that is like, you're not wrong. I don't know that I have anything added to it. I mean, I can draw parallels. It just it kind of reminds me when you were talking about the scene where Gandalf was talking about Bilbo's ancestors, Took, and talk about he was big enough to ride a horse and he knocked off a goblin's head and simultaneously invented the game of golf. And it's like, and he's like, you've made that up, haven't you? And it's like, yeah, well, it's like, and it reminded me like an episode of Star Trek DS9 where Worf talks about legends and heroes. It's like, it does not matter, what he did. If you believe he was a hero, then, no explanation is necessary. And it's like, but if you think he was a fraud, well, then no explanation will do. It's just kind of that thing is looking back on your ancestors and like, well, it's just a matter of, how you viewed them. Were they heroes or were they mad? That's it. I mean, not that it's relevant to what you said, but it's just a parallel I drew.
Okay. No, I think it's still relevant because, I mean, it does go to our perception of our ancestors.
Yeah, which I guess it would be relevant in the sense that Thorin, still held his ancestors in high regard and he wanted to honor them by taking back his homeland instead of moving on because the other character who the older dwarf whose name eludes me right now.
I keep wanting to call him the Amish dwarf.
Yeah. But he was saying, it's like, do you really need to do this? It's like you have done well for our people. You've given us a life, in the Blue Mountains. You've given us, what we lost somewhere else. You just adapt and continue to do well. In other words, it's like it's not important. Where, in fact, it was kind of like Odin's speech. Asgard was never a place; it's a people.
Yeah, it's an idea.
This could be Asgard.
And just to say something, in kind of a more modern sense, I know this. I don't want to get too wacky on this, so we'll just, America is an idea. It's not a specific place. So, the same thing applies here. It's like, look, we're doing what it is that we do, what our purpose is. We're being family. We're being, alive, if you will, and not in the sense that we're just, living, breathing things, but, we have lives. And yeah, no, I agree. It's about the idea and not the location.
Yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say about that.
That's all I got to say about that.
Just a little bit too. It's like when I mentioned, Worf, the parallel I drew and everything, and talking about parallels or anything. The funny thing, especially like the beginning scene when the dwarves first show up at Bilbo's house, and the way they greet each other is they headbutt each other.
Yes.
And I was just thinking, wow, it's like, are they? These guys are Klingons, It's like, and not 100% match. But there's a lot of aspects where I'm going. It's like the horrible table manners, the ruckus they cause and everything, and they just show up at your door and they just come right in and make themselves at home and everything. And I'm going, it's like, man, I wonder if that's how it is for with like the not necessarily the high warrior cast of Klingons, but just regular Klingons that you would meet from day to day if they act the same way.
Yeah, and the almost overwhelming obsession with familial honor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Definitely Klingons in that aspect.
Yeah, which, be interesting if they actually met Klingons and if they would find a kinship.
Well, there's a cross-genre mashup that hasn't been made yet that I know of.
I'd like to see it.
So Middle Earth is actually a planet, an actual planet, not just Earth in the prehistoric times, if you will, but it's a place that you could go to in Star Trek and still exists. I would be intrigued by that. I would love to see that. I'm a fan of mashups.
Yeah, it makes me think of that General Martok when he saw Courage in the little Ferengi boy, and he's like, "Take note, Courage comes in all sizes."
Yeah, absolutely. And I think again that's something that that Gandalf hit on about Bilbo. He inspires me. He's so small and has no power, and yet he's on this quest. Bilbo is brave.
Yes, that was the one tearful scene in this movie. His Gandalf speech about why the halflings. It's little things, single acts of kindness. And man, if that doesn't ring true for today, I don't know what does. The way things are right now.
Yep. So yeah, that actually brings me to my next piece. No, it doesn't. But I wanted to make it sound good.
What?
It does kind of tie into a lot of little things in this movie do make it good, but there are some little things that also detract from it. So,
well, I don't know. The thing I was going to bring up, and I don't know if it's a little thing. It's pretty big. It's been a common theme in a lot of our discussions of the show me versus tell me.
Mm-hmm.
And this movie had a little bit more tell me than show me. That by comparison, in Lord of the Rings, there was that opening scene in the very beginning that talked about the lost alliance between elves and men, and this is how we defeated Sauron, and this is what happened with the ring, and this is how Gollum got it, and this is how Bilbo got it, and okay, here we are, and then the story progressed.
Mm-hmm.
That was fine. I could live with that. Just introduce me to the world. Tell me there's some history. There were like at least two, I think 3 scenes of flashback of what happened. There was the opening scene talking about how the dwarves lost their homeland, and then there was a scene of the fight for Moria, and it's almost like, wow, there's a lot more of the tell me's in here, and I haven't really come to the conclusion as to whether or not that's a huge detriment, but it just seems like there were a little bit more of it here than there was in other movies of this franchise, I should say.
Yeah, I agree to a point. Again, some of them you have to, like how the dwarves lost their homeland, because that explains the whole motivation for Thorin in the first place. Mm-hmm. But I think that there were some that didn't necessarily need to be there. They were just filler. And this kind of goes back to what I'd asked earlier. Does this need to be a trilogy? There were some things that, again, seemed like filler. Like, yeah, you know what? I didn't need that in there. It just seems like you're kind of padding this movie so that you can make it to a trilogy as opposed to making it a part 1 and a part 2. Or just doing it all in one movie, a la the Rankin Bass animated movie back in the day, which I'm surprised we haven't already mentioned, and really is one of the most impactful movies in my childhood as far as like fantasy interest relates. I love the old original animated Hobbit movie, so there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, I think they could have done this in 2 movies and still maintained the same story if they'd have removed some of the filler flashbacks like you're talking about.
Yeah, because I'm like thinking about it, and it's like the white orc, it's who eventually had just a piece of metal as a prosthetic. And I don't think that they needed that whole flashback scene to show that it was Thorin who cut it off in the Battle of Moria. You could have done that with dialogue. And, I think it would have been just as, like when they first meet and like, I thought you were dead, and it's like, you only took my hand, but not my life or whatever, and it's just like, that would, that, again, armchair quarterbacking, I think that would have worked, because really, I'm thinking of Peter Pan. We didn't actually need to see the crocodile bite off Captain Hook's hand to know that there's an impact, there's a relationship between him and the crocodile. Because it was handled in dialogue, it was handled in his actions. Whenever he heard TikTok, you saw him go crazy.
I will disagree with you in the case of Peter Pan. I think that, one, because that movie was animated and most people tend to associate it with children, there is a point where showing me, if you just dialogue it out and say, yeah, he bit my hand off, it doesn't have the emotional resonance of actually seeing it happen.
Well, no, but I qualified that by saying that, it's like you saw it in how he reacted to hearing the TikTok, how, it wasn't just like, oh, a crocodile. No, it was that crocodile. And in the dialogue where Peter Pan says, oh, yeah, the crocodile bit his hand off. And, it was seen in his actions.
Yeah, but applying that same, thought process to this movie, I don't think that flashback needed to be that long, but I think that the flashback was useful in establishing, one, why he's called Thorin Oakenshield, and what the personal connection was. Had he just killed his father, I think that still would have been personal enough. And had they just shown Thorin's father being killed and then him using the shield, using the oak branch as a shield or whatever, Thorin doing that to escape or whatever, to rally his forces and whatnot, I think that would have been great. And then they just could have said later, that, or after the flashback, and I took his hand, that I think that would have been fine. I think it would have been more along what you're saying. I do think establishing the history with a short flashback would have been fine. I think it went on too long. It's kind of, I guess, my point.
Yeah, and again, like I said, it just seemed like there was a lot more tell me in this than there were show me, which, in my opinion, it has an impact. But to contrast that, a great show me scene, which I had a personal experience to compare this with, is the scene after the dwarfs leave Bilbo's house, and Bilbo wakes up, he's looking around like hello, and just that thing to show that the house is empty made it look 5 times bigger. And I had a personal experience that I could relate to because after my father died and after the funeral, when it was just me and my mother in the house, after the reception, after all the guests left and everything, it was just her and I in this house. Tiny little house built in the 40s, that I grew up in and everything like that. Felt like a cathedral.
Yep, I understand.
After that. And yeah, that scene really resonated with me. And it was just, it's that was an excellent example of show me. You felt the emotion. The dwarves are gone now. They're not in the house, and it just feels now empty and alone.
Yeah, I can see exactly where you're coming from. I understand that. So I know we are fast running out of time because, as you have mentioned a number of times, we're recording in the morning, and you do have to get on to work here shortly. So, have we covered all the stuff you had in your notes? Is there anything else you wanted to really hit?
Well, there was something that we had discussed that we wanted to talk about, and I guess we sort of touched on it though. Was the whole thing of the theme that this movie conveyed too was the theme of leaving comfort zones.
Mm-hmm.
We sort of discussed it. You got to get on with your life and everything. Yeah, but along with that, which by the way, pardon me for kind of backtracking here a little bit. It's like I was going to bring up, a couple movies where that was really featured, was leaving the comfort zones. And I remember was one of them was Finding Nemo. And the line that I really thought of was that it's like, I promised nothing would ever happen to Nemo. And they're like, well, that was a stupid promise. What do you mean? It's like, well, if you promise that, then nothing's ever going to happen. And I really think that's something that Gandalf was really kind of getting on. You had mentioned this, Gandalf, get off your ass and get out there and live,
Yeah.
And the other movie I thought of that was Castaway, the scene when he finally leaves the island.
Okay.
Because, here's this guy, he's lived 4 years on that island. That, for all intents and purposes, was his comfort zone. He learned to survive. He could have lived there for the rest of his life. But that wasn't living, not to him. And he had to leave that comfort zone. And it was a really potent scene when he left the island and you saw it disappear into the mist.
Yeah, and now I really am on my own, if you will.
I'm on a journey. I'm on an adventure. Yeah. Not quite the contract, but same spirit.
Okay, because I was going to say I don't necessarily agree with that 100% as a comparison, but you qualified it, so I'm better now.
Okay.
And it's mostly because his whole purpose in the first place was trying to figure out how to get out of the comfort zone. Yes, you're right. He could have lived there until he died, but I think his whole goal was to not be where he was anyway, whereas Bilbo was falling into my goal is to make sure my plates don't get broken and my silverware doesn't get tarnished or whatnot. He was falling into that shirey, hobbity comfort zone. Like, no, we don't do anything. We don't go anywhere. We live nice, safe lives.
Yeah, which really comes up to like one of the last things that I have in my notes, and that is realizing potential. And, I've always scratched that. Not always. Relatively recently, I had this thing in my head of there is tested and then there is untested. And the genesis of that thought process came from the movie WALL-E, where the ship captain, when we first meet him, the captain of the Axiom.
Yep.
Yeah, he's fat, relatively lazy, doesn't really do anything. But the thing about his character is he's not really an idiot. He's just untested. In other words, he's been, he's living a life of sloth because that's all he has. He's never had a challenge. He's never had a reason to go beyond his place, I guess, if you want to say. And that is how we find, it seems, Bilbo Baggins in this, where he's living a very uneventful, comfortable life in the Shire. Everything's just going to happen accordingly. I'm going to go to the market, I'm going to get my meal, I'm going to cook it, I'm going to eat it, and I'm going to maybe do some writing, read some books, whatever. But it's a life that's untested because it's just comfortable. And both characters rise up to their potentials. And to me, that's a life lesson that, movies can give us and everything. Because, the trend today, and this is like something that really annoys me, and here I'm going to get socio-political a little bit.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, we were so close, but it's like, it seems like it's a fun pastime for people to put down the latest generation. And right now, the latest generation is the millennials. Oh, the millennials this, the millennials that. They don't do anything. They're not as good as the past generation. It's like, and I'm not getting too much into problems with the past generation, i.e. our generation, because our generation wasn't perfect. But if you ask anybody, oh yeah, ours was perfect. Compared to these guys, ours were utopian. But, the thing that people forget to realize is that even the people who we consider the greatest generation, the ones who fought and won World War II for the Allies, before war broke out, they were the lost generation. In other words, they had potential, but they were untested. During the 20s and 30s, they were struggling. People had no hope for them. They were bad-mouthed. And I know this because my father used to tell me this. He lived through that generation as a child. So at the time, they were untested. They had World War II for them to rise to their potential.
Yeah, and rise to the occasion they did. But, and I'm not saying this to be negative, because I do think that, I don't know. This is so hard because there's such hero worship of that generation, and rightfully so. They eventually stopped the Holocaust and did so many great things. My point is not that they didn't achieve great things. My point is that even while they were achieving great things, there was still bad stuff that happened. So, I think what you're saying is, every generation speaks ill of the following generation. Like, we fought the Great War. In my day, we didn't have machine guns. We had to stuff powder and wadding and shot.
Mm-hmm.
You kids have it easy with your repeating rifles and blah, 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 blah. It's nature. I find it interesting, and this is kind of a weird segue, that most of the kvetching now is between the perceptions of boomers and the perceptions of millennials, but our generation, Gen X, I don't know if we're the ones doing the bitching, or if it's just that no one seems to want to say anything about Gen X, and Gen X is kind of becoming the forgotten middle connector between the boomers and the millennials.
We're just lying low. We're just, mm-hmm. But yeah, like I said, it's an annoying thing. I don't want to get too much into it because but it's just it is tested and untested. trained and untrained. And I think that, I don't see very, aside from the changing societal norms, the changing technology, but I don't see anything different. Okay, yeah, we're not. Back in my day, they complain you watch too much TV. What are they complaining about now? Oh, you're too much on the phone. Same thing.
Oh yeah, same thing. New technology. It's like I think I saw a cartoon, an editorial cartoon had oh, we never talk to each other anymore, and it's people riding the bus or the trolley car or
all reading
or
the
whatever,
newspaper,
all reading the newspapers. Like, oh, okay, so now the manner in which I do the thing makes it different. Yeah, no, it's the same problems, new technology. But that kind of, bringing it back to The Hobbit for just a second, you kind of see the difference in generations between Bilbo and Frodo, which I think is kind of the point. You're meant to see the younger generation being influenced by the romanticized and held in high regard older generation. Frodo adores Bilbo, and that kind of thing that you see at the very beginning when Bilbo's writing the book and getting ready for the party that you see in the Fellowship of the Ring, you can tell that Frodo is influenced by this desire to go out and see the world that Bilbo saw, and he's less restrained, if you will, by the old guard or the ideas of the old guard that no, we stay in our holes and we live our little lives and farm our little lands. You see that generational shift, and it's actually addressed in a little bit in the beginning of this movie where Frodo says something about like, oh, people are starting to think you're odd, So I think, again, this movie, in its own little way, in its own little piece, does a good job of discussing the generational differences between, the different, are we calling them species? Hobbits, dwarves, humans,
I guess.
elves.
I get, I mean, Neanderthals, Cro-Magnon, and Homo sapiens were all considered different species. So, yeah, I guess you could say dwarves, hobbits, elves, all different species.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, but I've actually covered everything that I had in my notes, because really one of the biggest things that I wanted to talk about was the overarching theme of the movie, because we could beat the special effects to death. The music was phenomenal. I thought it really kept with the Lord of the Rings that inspired it.
Yeah. And again, no discredit to Tolkien or anything. I'm not saying I'm sick of it, I'm just saying that, talking about Tolkien, what he meant, how, what his influences were, it's been done. And, I don't want to reinvent the wheel, and so to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, I just, what did the movie mean to you thematically? And yeah. So, all right, then.
Just one last thing, though. One last thing. Did you? Yeah, eventually.
I'm kidding.
So did you find or did you notice the Mannheim scream?
I did, actually. Yeah, that was I think what was one of the goblins.
Yeah.
Yeah. I laughed out loud.
Mm-hmm. Just
I thought it was a Wilhelm scream.
Is it Mannheim or Wilhelm?
I thought it was Wilhelm.
I thought it was okay, well, if we had more time, I'd look it up. Listeners.
It is the Wilhelm scream. Ah! I laughed. I'm like, oh, cool. Good goblin. Mm-hmm. Yay.
Well, if it's got that, it belongs in our collection.
Great. I'm buying a whole lot more movies then. So where does this belong on your shelf? Or where would it go on your shelf?
because it's the box set, and it's the box set for the Lord of the Rings, it belongs on the part of the bookshelf, so to say, that has all the movie box sets, which is, a relatively prestigious height. Not necessarily the pinnacle, but it's not general population.
Okay. I would put this on the middle of the second shelf. And again, I was trying to avoid it, but I don't think that you can. I mean, I suppose you could if we tried harder, but trying to avoid doing the Lord of the Rings comparison. But I think this is behind the Lord of the Rings, the trilogy, in its entirety. It's probably in the middle of the second shelf. There were some issues, and I think we discussed them as far as like some of the CGI type stuff getting in the way of the story. And I think that there were a couple of issues, like I talked about earlier, with mirroring events in The Lord of the Rings. And since we'd already seen that, kind of taking it and not making it its own thing. So, Second Shelf, still good, still interesting to watch. It's not as good as its predecessor. And I know I'm not alone in that assessment.
No.
I don't want to jump on the hater bandwagon, if you will, because I kind of hate that. It's not as good. Like, I mean, I'd like to hope that my opinion was not influenced by other people's megaphoned opinion of it. I put it here because, again, so many callbacks and things that it almost doesn't feel like its own story in its own right. But still fun. Still had a good time. Yeah. Still enjoyed it.
Yeah, I agree.
With that, should we find out what we're watching next?
Let's do it.
All right, let's push the random magic movie generator button.
National Treasure.
Oh, National Treasure.
Interesting. Okay. I don't think I own that one.
I do.
Okay.
Obviously.
Obviously. Well, I will watch it on Amazon streaming.
Very well then. Well, it might be available on the Netflix.
I'll check it out.
If you have that, I don't even know. Do you have Netflix?
Yes. It's like, how dare you? Boy, if I could reach this.
Well, I read something, maybe, I don't even know who posted it, so maybe you've seen it too. Read something the other day, somebody tweeted, I told a youngster the other day that I remember when Netflix used to deliver to you. And they looked at me like I was crazy, and you're like, yeah, how about that?
I do remember that
too. Yeah, in fact, I would like to apologize I think I've paid for it over time, but one of the movies that's on my list is a movie that's still in the little Netflix case, package, the little envelope thing.
You never sent it back?
We never sent it back. I completely forgot.
Don't.
So yeah, I paid for it, so it's mine now. But that's Ip Man, if you recall correctly, if you know of that movie.
Very nice.
Yep, that's the reason I own that, but that's a story for another time. So in the meantime, listeners, if you would like to leave us a voicemail, you can do that on the number you'll find in the links, but our phone number is, I always forget, so let's go here, and, oh, hey, we have a new voicemail.
Yep.
Oh, hey, just so you know, there's been some suspicious activity, and the Social Security Administration wants us to call on a number that has
let's call them and give them all their information to make sure it's all safe.
Yes, exactly. Listeners, don't do that. That's bad. But they called us at 804-699-1067. So
totally legit.
If you want to do that too, then give us a call at that number and leave us a voicemail like Rob Neese did that you listened to earlier in the podcast. Or you can email us at wrios2016mr@gmail.com. Hit us up on the Facebook page, the Twitters, and I'm considering an Instagram page, although, again, my performance as our social media manager has been a bit lackluster, so I don't know if I want to add another media source, and I don't know how to make a link to that. So, just hit us up on those, and listen to us and share us with your friends wherever they get their podcasts. And we will see you in 2 weeks with National Treasure. Oh, shoot, Dan. I can't say that. What's your movie thing? Goodbye.
Oh, shoot, I totally forgot. Wow, I don't think I had one planned. You know what? Powerful line, tearjerker. If you ever need me, I'll be there. You are not alone.
Okay. All right. And with that, we'll see you in 2 weeks with National Treasure. Thanks.